Welcome to this Jisc Legal Frequently Asked Questions video. My name is John Kelly and I've been joined by Jackie Milne, who's a specialist in e-safety. What are the basics that a college should have in place in terms of e-safety?
Well, there's a legal basis for providing a safe online environment. Colleges are obliged through statute to safeguard the welfare of learners, and there's also the common law duty of care that colleges owe learners and staff. So in providing a safe learning environment, there are really probably two aspects to that. Firstly, there are preventative measures that colleges can and should have in place. Really, we're talking about, I suppose, identifying, assessing and trying to minimise risks as far as reasonably possible, or as far as they can. So an obvious risk might be, for example, in a college hosted site you would have certain controls, you'd have filtering, firewalls and so on. If you're then considering using an external platform, then that might be a factor to consider where you maybe don't have those controls in place. There are other risks that will depend on the particular circumstances. If you're working with younger learners or learners who maybe don't have a kind of high level of understanding, things might be foreseen as happening and you have to take measures to kind of minimise that. Also, another example we get asked quite a lot about, where you're asking learners to input personal information. That might include sensitive information, confidential type issues, and you don't want to then have a kind of openly accessible forum for that. So really looking at the risks is kind of the basics. But I would also say that if you're setting up a platform or indeed using a hosted platform like Moodle, for example, you want to have some kind of set of e-safe rules of acceptable use that kind of tie in the contributors or posters, if you like. And probably the best thing to do, or the most effective, is going to be raising the profile of e-safety through training, through education, letting learners know what good practice is.
What Jisc Legal has often been asked, does the college need to get consent for young learners to be using YouTube, for example? What's the best advice on that?
Well, there's no black and white answer, there's no line to be drawn. It will depend again on the circumstances. But certainly if you're working with 17-year-olds, for example, who use this a lot of the time, there's a kind of reasonable expectation that they understand when they're searching for YouTube what they're looking for. They can kind of narrow that down, and if they come across something inappropriate, what do they do? That should be a kind of conversation that takes place. I don't think parental or consent of guardians would probably be required there, but on the other side, if you're working with, say, 14-year-olds, then you might be looking at some form of consent in those circumstances.
A lot of colleges will have procedures and all sorts of arrangements in place, but what do they actually do when something does go wrong, when an incident does occur? What do they do?
Yeah, the second part of providing a safe learning environment is to be able to respond if something happens. So first of all, having procedures in place that deal with that state, step by step how that is then dealt with by the institution is a good first step, because that means you can make an immediate response. You're not thinking as you go along, what can we do here? Also, the institution, the college, will have to act. Something will have to be done in a circumstance. For example, someone reports a bullying incident. That should trigger some policy relevant in the college, the anti-bullying, the disciplinary, and so on. But I think there's also a kind of note of caution here that if an incident occurs and you're investigating that incident, that would have to be considered a kind of fair process. Any sanctions imposed would have to be fair, they'd have to be proportionate according to the circumstances. And of course, if there's any criminal activity, then you would need to be referring that immediately to the police for their advice.
We've had a few queries where teachers have had really awful and abusive stuff directed at them via Facebook. How can a college respond to that?
It can be tricky, it can be frustrating. The college should really have some kind of support mechanism in place for that member of staff. All that can be done really is to go through Facebook, to go through their reporting procedure. They've now produced an image which kind of illustrates, it's a guide really as to how that complaint will be dealt with. So really contacting Facebook. It's not immediate, it will take a bit of time probably. So the individual will need to go through that process, probably with some support by the college. But we do get asked sometimes about individual staff members taking actions, a kind of civil action of defamation and so on, and that's really a decision for them to take. It's quite a kind of onerous action to take, and it's quite difficult to prove, but again, there are actions open to individuals.
And is it always possible to trace someone like that? Is there, in your experience, is it how anonymous are these groups, or does everyone know who the person is anyway? And if you do know, what can you do?
Well, if you know who they are, then there's a way to tie into that individual via Facebook, or if it's a criminal activity, if there's racist abuse and so on, then the police can work through that as well. If it's anonymous, it's a lot more difficult, obviously, and with the nature of Facebook, individuals can set up, I think they call them imposter accounts and so on. So that is very tricky, and really all you can do is, again, you would go through Facebook. If they find it violates their policies, their statement of rights and responsibilities, then they will act, probably have that removed and possibly suspend the account itself. But it can be tricky, and when I've been asked about that, really the college, all they can do is kind of raise the profile of e-safety once again and have that kind of maybe training or education input.
Thank you very much, Jackie. That's been very helpful.
Colleges looking for help on e-safety can contact their local regional support centre. Jisc Legal resources are available on the e-safety theme page of our website.